welcome back to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's live video series, and with us today to share the stories behind the 10 books that influenced her the most on her spiritual journey is author, channel, writer, creator, truth seeker and artist Jean Tinder, whose life and journey have not exactly been ordinary. Jean comes from a deeply conservative Christian background. She was born and raised in a family of Seventh-day Adventist missionaries. Her father was a printer, a preacher and a theologian, and her mother was a nature-loving, homeschooling pioneer mother who never made Jean attend a regular school. How cool is that? Instead, when she wasn't devouring hundreds of books from the public library, Jean spent countless hours wandering the forests and mountains around her home in the northeast Washington state wilderness. And I want to say a little bit more about you because you've had a really interesting life. In 1997, you began a series of conversations with God in your journal. You've always loved writing. You used to do some really cool things as a child. You loved to create gifts of tiny paper books filled with Bible verses, and you've journaled since the age of 10. So I think having a conversation with God and journaling that, I mean, how different was that from when you were just journaling your own thoughts?
That's a good question. There's a different feeling when I'm talking, so to speak, sensing, communicating with someone other than my mind. And it began, like you said, back in 97. The day, I remember the day, my husband at the time was all stressed out about something, and he was heading out the door to see a client, and just life was really stressful. We had a new baby and all this stuff was going on, and I was telling him goodbye on the front porch, and I felt this feeling of pressure, sort of, but like coming from inside, or just something. It's very hard to describe. And so I went to my room as soon as he left and just started writing, and I filled a page with what was coming out. And I didn't know where it was coming from or why or anything, but it was very comforting, reassuring. And I sat with that, and I realized I was talking to spirit. And at the time, I don't know how deep you want me to go into everything, but it was something that meant so much to me. We were attending a church at the time that invited the audience or the congregation to hear words from the Lord. And so that's kind of the definition or the box that I put it in. That expanded greatly over the years, but that's how it started. And it is a different feeling.
So you weren't shocked?
No, because I've always felt spirit. I've always felt a connection. When I was a girl, I called it Jesus, and I have a personal relationship with Jesus, or I knew him as Yeshua. So it was very familiar, but it was a new way of communicating.
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, after that, you've worked with many angelic entities, including Tobias, Germain, Raphael, Kasumi, Yeshua, and others. And we will talk about those a little later. Before we start talking about your books, I want to know, at what age would you really say that you consciously embarked on a spiritual path?
Well, I was born into a very religious family. And so in a way, it started with that. I chose that family to come into. But when I was 14, and growing up, religion was kind of the overarching dynamic of the family, prayer, worship, and all that. When I was 14, though, I remember lying in bed and feeling a very personal invitation from Jesus to work with him and to serve him. I had the language at the time, but it was a very personal connection. And from that moment on, it's like, yes, whatever it takes.
So when you were a child and you were taking home 10, 20 books from the library, what kind of books were they?
Mostly they were biographies and historical tales. We were not allowed to read fiction. That was part of the religious system that we were in. So I learned a lot about historical figures, nature, adventures, people that would go off on adventures like Farley Mowat and the wolves, and we'd read about that. Clara Barton, all these historical figures. I read a lot of that, and also more educational things on medicine or geography, or, anything I could get my hands on, really. It was not fiction. I couldn't bring fiction.
And not esoterica?
No.
Not at that age, no. Okay. Well, books, clearly, I mean, you love books, and you describe your love of books in a beautiful way. You talk about them as interdimensional portals, time-traveling devices, oracles of wisdom, keys to immortality, and purveyors of the mysteries of both ancient and modern life. So how difficult was it for you to pick 10 out of all of the books that you've read?
It was a challenge, because I have read many, many books and gotten something from every single one. But the ones that made my list, I've read and just devoured. They just fed something in me and expanded my awareness. And it was a little hard to narrow it down, but these are the most special. And one of them, I think it's at the top of the list. I've read 4 times. It's almost time for another read.
Oh, yes, Robert Monroe. I was going to ask you, why 4 times?
Well, I discovered that book in my 20s when I had discovered that section of the library, the esoterica, as you call it, the new age. I was learning about past lives and near-death experiences and a little bit of channeling, and which my religion would have called talking with the devil, but it was really expanding my awareness. And one of the books on that shelf was Far Journeys by Robert Monroe. And I read that, which is about his experiences out of body and the research that he's done. And it just rang so many bells in me. It's like, yes, this is how it is. I know this is true. I feel it. And every maybe 6, 7, 8 years, I would pick it up again and just start reading. And it's a page turner for me. It's so full of, like there's one part where he travels into what we would call the future. And he describes the earth as I've always known it could be, as what I've known we could turn it into. And it's like a confirmation and encouragement to me. And
do you remember when you read that book? How old you were the first time?
Probably around 25-ish, give or take a couple years. Yeah, probably around 25, yeah.
And you also, your number 2 book is Ultimate Journey by Robert Monroe. So you got kind of the beginning and the end of that. So what was it that you really enjoyed about Ultimate Journey?
The first time I read Ultimate Journey was a few years after I read Far Journeys. And I read through it and I found it a little difficult to get through. It was it was harder to define. He was talking about experiences that were just hard to put into words. And so it was a little hard for me to read. And then in 2008, I had moved and I brought it with me, all my precious books, and I looked at it and something pulled me to read it again. And I think it's a big book, and I think I plowed through it in less than a week. And I just wept, because with everything I had done and learned, particularly with the Crimson Circle, I experienced Ultimate Journey in a completely new way. And I knew what he was talking about. He was describing in completely different words and terms and frame of reference exactly what I was doing, exactly my journey and what we're opening into, what some of us call ascension, or enlightenment or realization. he described in his journey, in Ultimate Journey, and it really blew me away.
One of his books, and I think I've only read one, maybe, and the one I read might have been the Out of Body one of the early ones, where he was talking about how this all started for him. And I was always intrigued by astral travel, but it put me off because he talked about all kinds of things that he experienced leaving his body and all kinds of entities. How did that sit for you with your religious upbringing?
I came to realize that lacking an expanded understanding, the religion I grew up in labeled everything with Satan or the devil or bad or evil, anything unseen was the devil trying to mislead you. And I liked that Robert Monroe talked about these things. Obviously, some entities were helpful, some were not, some were distracting, some were uplifting, just like people. And that made all kinds of sense to me because we're all just beings with or without a body. And we all have to use our discernment in who we interact with on Earth or elsewhere. And so to me, it made a lot of sense. I didn't ever really buy into the fear of the unknown that I was kind of taught. I just felt like there was more to it, more to understand. And so I didn't really have a problem with it. And I loved how he explained these different realms.
Did you ever want to go to the Monroe Institute and actually do some work there?
Oh, desperately. I really wanted to. In my 20s and 30s, I would have given anything to go there. I had children at home and, not much money and stuff, so it wasn't really an option. But yeah, I did order a few of his CDs though.
Yes, I've had loads of his CDs. Yeah. And I wanted to go. I really, really wanted to go, but never did. I did have an experience when somebody was teaching a weekend but it wasn't that great. And I don't think I was in the right place to take advantage of it. I think being there at the Monroe Institute, would have been a whole different ballgame.
Sure. Yes.
Yeah. So interestingly, book number 3 then, is kind of related experiences in a way because it's Journey of the Angels, which is the Tobias Materials, the story of creation that's never been told, now told by a real angel. And I have to say that when I read that book, it moved me greatly. It really, really did. And it was, as you said, I know this.
Yes.
Yeah, it's that feeling. So this probably would be an appropriate point then to say, well, how did you go from that to, working with the Crimson Circle and studying with them?
Well, I discovered Crimson Circle in 2002. The company Jeff started channeling publicly in 1999. And I came across in a very synchronistic manner, which there's so many stories of just amazing ways that people find Crimson Circle. And I found it for myself in 2002 and started listening after August 2002. I never missed a webcast. I went through all the messages. And it's just like, since my early 20s, I was searching. I knew there was more, I knew there was more to dying than I'd been taught. I knew there was more to life. There was more out there that we didn't understand. And so I spent time in New Age bookstores and of course in that section of the library, always looking. And there was always, everything had a piece of what I was looking for. But then it would go off on some distracting topic or something. And it's like, well, that doesn't quite feel right, but there's a piece. And when I found Crimson Circle, it was like, this is it. This is what I've been looking for so long. This puts into words what I know. And I have continued to experience that ever since. In 2004, early 2004, I moved from Oregon to Colorado. Just one of those things, the inner knowing that I have to do this with my baby daughter. Without a plan. I didn't know anybody, didn't have friends, a job or anything, but somehow I survived and I began to do a little bit of volunteer work with Crimson Circle, which is also based in Colorado. would help at events or whatever. And then at the end of 2007, just before New Year's, out of the blue, I received a job offer from Jeff. So that's how I got into it.
Did you move there to be close to Crimson Circle?
That was definitely a part of it, but it was a big part of it, but not with an agenda. In other words, I knew it was time for me to move, and my brother lived in Santa Fe at the time, and he kept telling me, you need to come to Santa Fe. That's where your people are. And it's like, all right, I'll check it out. So I came to Denver for, my plan was to take in a workshop that Crimson Circle was offering over the new year. And then I would go down to Santa Fe and stay with my brother for a while and, start my new life. What changed was while I was in Denver for about a week for the workshop and then their monthly meeting, somewhere in there, it's like, it really dawned on me like a thunderbolt. This is home. I feel home in this place in Colorado. It's like, I guess it's not Santa Fe where I'm supposed to be. I'm supposed to be here. And so that's what I went on, that feeling of I'm home. There was no plan, no agenda to other than I get to go to the meeting in person every month. That was awesome. But they were doing it online. So it was wonderful, that part of it, but that wasn't why I moved. I just knew this is where I had to be.
It's so interesting because, that 20-year period from sort of just the end of the last millennium, so many people moved around and found themselves exactly in the place they needed to be. I mean, I was going to San Diego from, England via Canada, and I happened to read a Cryon book that somebody gave me and realized they were down the road. Wow. And, from where I was going to live. I mean, not that I ever, obviously I know Lee, but never worked with Lee. I ended up doing a lot of work with Steve and Barbara, but, it's how you just end up in these places and something really important happens there for you. You find your tribe. Yeah, you come home.
And so much of that, like you say, so much of that happened in these 20 years. It was like this big call of, okay, everybody find your place. We got stuff to do.
Yeah. Getting us ready for what's happening right now, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what role do you play at the Crimson Circle? I know that you're a much valued member of the team, but I never, you seem to have control of everything. And I don't know whether that's true or not, but what exactly do you do?
My title is content manager. And I wouldn't say I have control. I have my finger in everything. It is a content-based company. In other words, Jeff does the channeling and provides the content. And then everything that we put out, publish, whether website pages or the recordings or whatever, I oversee that. I do it, go through the text. And there's a lot of things. We put out the magazine every month, which just went out this morning.
Yes, I saw that.
I'm editor for that. So being a content-based company, I'm kind of in all the parts and pieces. And
you call it your dream job.
Yes, it is. Well, like I said, when I found Crimson Circle, it's like, this is my people. This is my home. And for whatever reason, I'm able to remember a lot of things, like this was talked about at that thing, and that was talked about back then. And I can find references very easily, refer people to stuff. So it was kind of a natural fit.
Cool. So let's move on to book 4. And you're going to have to pronounce this person's name because I've looked all over the internet and cannot find anywhere how to pronounce it. Hungarian author, journalist, screenwriter, actress as well. The book is The Red Lion by
Maria Zeppes, I think. Now, I'm not Hungarian, so I don't know if that's correct.
Well, there's no way to find out.
I would say Zeppes or maybe Chepes, something like that. Yeah.
So that was published in 1946, and I never heard of this book. So obviously I looked it up and I thought, wow, that's an interesting one. So tell us about it.
Yeah. The origins of the book are explained a little bit in the beginning. And is it a novel? Well, kind of. This person talks about living in the country and a stranger comes to the door and delivers a manuscript. And that's the book. Now, the book is about a person who he's introduced as the student, and he has the master, the enlightened being, who is there to teach him enlightenment or guide his way into enlightenment. And part of it is this elixir, that once you have the elixir, you have eternal life. And of course, that's what everybody wants, the eternal life, the magic without the work. And this person, at some point, he kills the master, takes the elixir, and the book is about what happens after that. It's really about going too soon into something you're not ready for. He lives through many different lifetimes, but he retains his memory. You know, he's born into a new body and he knows everything that he's experienced, and he knows people from other lifetimes. It's a fascinating book and has tremendous, well, you might say lessons, teachings, insights about life and how it works. And there have been a number of times where Saint Germain has taken credit for writing it. And he actually figures into the story later in the book. He's a character in the story. And to be honest, the whole thing has this ring of truth. It's like, yeah, that's really how it works.
Well, it's interesting that this book, I mean, was published in 1946 in Hungary, communist regime. Book was considered to be non-conformist and therefore prohibited. All copies were ordered to be destroyed. However, a librarian and novelist managed to save 4 copies. And then several supporters of the author typed up the novel, made templates for printing, released the self-made copies through the underground, and 40 years later, the novel arrived on the desk of a company who then translated it into German, and it was published as a paperback in 1984. I mean, what a story about a book.
Yes, I did not know all that. That's so interesting. I knew it was kind of prohibited in Hungary, but I didn't know the rest. That's fascinating.
Clearly a book that was meant to be in many hands.
At its appropriate time, too. It was like back then, and the world wasn't ready for it, but now, definitely.
What did you, for yourself, what did you take from that book?
I think I took the real visceral understanding of how my choices affect my journey into all my lifetimes. And I understand now it's forward and back. It's not really linear, like last lifetime, this lifetime, next lifetime. I have a different understanding of that now, but it's all about the choices that I make and the things that I do, whether I'm conscious of my choices or not. They really have an impact. And so the best thing I can do is become really conscious of why I'm choosing things and why I'm doing things. And also just the bigger picture of the journey of a soul. You know, I look at, sometimes my children will be having challenges or other people. And if I step back, I can look into their big picture journey and realize that everything is okay. It's hard right now, but it's just this step along a big, big journey, and they're going to be okay.
Yeah, this is something that I think is coming to fore in some people's minds at the moment. You know, we're living in a very difficult transitional time. However, if we look at the bigger picture, then it makes it easier.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's profound.
When did you read the book?
I think that one I read probably in the mid 2000s because I heard it mentioned first at Crimson Circle. And so it would 2005 or 6, I think, is when I first got it. And that's one I've read 2 or 3 times. And it's about time for another.
Okay. So, excuse me, book number 5. The Afterlife of Billy Fingers. So tell us about that one while I try and get my voice back.
That's one, of course, it's a fairly recent one. It was published just a few years ago. And I kept seeing people mention it on Facebook, like, oh, you have to read this book. And so one day I was thinking I want something to read, for a little while before I go to sleep or whatever. And I ordered that book, and oh, it was just delightful, just delightful. This person's sense of humor, his insight into his own journey, what happens when you die, and really the bigger picture of so many things. It was just wonderful. And there's so many one-liners in it that could be bumper stickers and signs on the wall and quotes. It's so inspiring and so delightful. It's not heavy at all. Some of these books, like The Red Lion, is pretty heavy. Far Journeys, maybe not heavy, but it's serious. The Afterlife of Billy Fingers is just full of joy. It's just wonderful. I love that book.
I interviewed Annie Kagan when the book came out. I loved the interview. I loved her, loved the book. I think there's been so many books written about, people from the afterlife telling their stories. This one is different.
Yes.
And it's a standout. And I reached out to Annie last year for somebody else. And she's completely stepped back from everything, which I thought was such a shame, because I thought it was such a great book. But no, she didn't want to talk about it anymore.
Wow. It is a good book, but it's, not everybody's in the same place or ready for the inner development that comes along with that kind of material.
Yeah. So book number 6 is one that comes up a lot, and that is The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, published in 1988. And it is so interesting when books come up frequently to hear the impact that they had on different people. Because there's always, something that somebody gets out of the book that other people don't. So what was it about this book that impacted you?
Well, a couple things over the years. It's a wonderful book. I love this story. But the reason it's on my list and the reason it made a big impression on me was kind of after the fact. In 2005, I went on a tour workshop with Crimson Circle. They called it the Camelot Tour. And one of the places we stopped was the Camelot Castle overlooking Merlin's Cave. And one morning at 4 o'clock in the morning, I went down the hill into Merlin's Cave to be there by myself. And it was an absolutely magical experience. There were purple twinkling lights. It was just incredible. And I collected a couple pocketfuls of pebbles. Don't know if you're supposed to do that, but just little pebbles from the beach, essentially. And I was personally doing a few workshops after that on my own, just offering some small workshops. And those pebbles, I would let people take a pebble as a souvenir from the workshop from Merlin's Cave. Kind of felt magical. But there was 3 little pebbles in my collection that I had to keep. They were just there, and I kept hoping people wouldn't choose them. And it's like, well, if I don't want them to choose those pebbles, I should keep them. And it's 2, I should have brought them. I might have them here. It's 2 little pebbles, a black one and a white one, and a gold one, kind of gold color. And as I decided to keep them and I set them aside in my own things rather than give them away, I made the connection of the black and white stones mentioned in that book. And they were just, it was so magical to me. And in the telling, it's like, well, they're just rocks, but these stones have stayed with me and even showed up. I had my luggage stolen on one of the trips, and those 3 stones ended up in my coat pocket after they should have been stolen with everything else. So it's quite magical. And then the other thing, a couple of years ago, my daughter was in high school, and her English teacher assigned a book to everyone to read, and it was The Alchemist. And all her classmates just like, well, this is boring. I don't get this. And she just came home lit up every day about what she was learning. And so I showed her my little stones, and it's just kind of been magic along the way.
Mm-hmm. We had on a few weeks ago, Colin Holland, who is the guy that was partly responsible for the success of that book, because he was working with HarperCollins at the time, and he had to decide how many copies they printed of books, and he was in Australia, and he read that book, and he gave the team back in San Francisco, a number that they never ever went that far, and said, no, we have to print 200,000 copies of this book. And it was like, whoa, are you sure? And they did, and it became a great success. And he met Paulo when Paulo was in Australia, and he's just now released his own book called The Secret of the Alchemist, because it changed his life. Wow. And it's actually my bookworm for this month. Just been published on the website, because there's something about that book. I mean, there's so many books with secret in the title of late.
Sure. Yeah.
But there's something about that book that, he found something so profound in The Alchemist, transformed his life, and now he's transforming other people's lives by sharing the secret that he found in that book. So it is a magical book. It is a magical book, and I would say that The Secret of the Alchemist is a magical book too.
That's great. I'm going to check it out.
Yeah, there's a free excerpt on the page of the bookworm page, so you can start reading. Actually, it's chapter 6 is the excerpt, but really, I love the way these things work, the synchronicities.
Yes.
Yeah. So number 7 is another book I've loved, Life After Life by Raymond Moody.
So that was one of the first ones I read. I don't know exactly what was first, but I guess my spiritual search began when I was 19 or 20, and I just knew that the teachings about death that I knew and had received couldn't be right. It just wasn't right. My religion taught that when you die, you're dead and your body goes in the ground, and that's just, you're asleep until Jesus comes, and then he puts your body back together and you go to heaven. And that just didn't make sense to me, because you start asking questions. What about people that died thousands of years ago? Where's their body? So I started looking in that section of the library about books beyond death, near death, whatever. And that book about reincarnation and between death just blew me open. It's like, yes, this makes so much sense.
Yeah. Do you ever get the feeling that, we think we're out there seeking knowledge when really we're just trying to remember something?
Yes. And that's how when something just has the ring of truth. It's like, yes, that's what I know, because you already know it. You just forgot.
Yeah, absolutely. Just forgot. So number 8, I mean, I love the theme of these books, Strangers Among Us. And actually you've slipped another one in, Here and Hereafter by Ruth Montgomery.
That was my first encounter with something called channeling. And of course that would be very forbidden, playing with the devil and all that. But at the time it was, and I kind of hid those books. It's like, oh my, person is actually talking to somebody on the other side. But everything that was shared, which I honestly don't remember the details of it. I remember the feeling of everything that was shared made so much sense. And it just made it possible for me to go there and to realize, of course, we can talk to beings, and it's not everybody on the other side is wise and ascended and all of that, or enlightened. It's just like humans. There's many different levels of consciousness, and you use your own discernment. You don't need anybody else to tell you what's forbidden and what's appropriate and all that. You can tell, you can feel. So those books really opened me up to that.
You did say in your write-up about that one that you no longer believe in walk-ins in the way that she portrayed them, but you've discovered that for many on this journey, the purpose of life is that we walk in to ourselves.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bringing our full divine self into our human experience. I've often thought that, you know, I mean, I read one of Jean Montgomery's books years and years ago, and I wasn't sure about walk-ins.
Yeah.
But since I went to America and everything kind of opened up and evolved for me in my life, I began to wonder about what we're actually doing is reconnecting with parts of ourselves and then bringing them back into this daily life.
Absolutely. That's really what this whole journey is we have so many parts and pieces of ourselves scattered around creation in many different experiences, and this is about bringing them back together. And when you allow your divine essence to really inhabit yourself, your human, it does change your life. You know, I know she talked about walk-ins, that it's a different person after this happens. Well, you do become a different person when your full self is here rather than just these little parts of you.
Yeah, yeah. Number 9 is 2 books again. I love the way people always sneak a few extra in. Illusions, The Adventures of a Reluctant Messiah, Jonathan Livingston Seagull by Richard Bach. 2
Oh,
more
yes.
classics. Yeah.
Yes. I love everything he's written. I didn't mention the others, but anything by Richard Bach, he has such a way of portraying and explaining and through story and imagination the bigger reality. I just love anything by him. And Jonathan Livingston Seagull, like many, I think, who are connected with this kind of work, we feel like Jonathan.
Yeah.
We don't fit in. We know there's more.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it, how you come across these books and you recognize so much.
Yes. Yeah.
Mm. Well, number 10, now this is a little odd one that intrigues me. Summer with the Leprechauns, a true story by Tanis Helliwell.
Yeah, that's off a little tangent there. Part of seeing the bigger picture or feeling and sensing the bigger picture is that there is a bigger picture, whether other human beings, angelic beings, or elemental beings. Those are absolutely part of life on Earth and in all reality. And this book is a delightful story about a woman who went on vacation in Ireland for the summer and encountered a family of leprechauns. Like literally, she could see them, she talked to them, they taught her things, and it's just such a fun read. And it leaves you saying, where's my leprechauns?
Now, apparently they had a message, didn't they, about the planet?
Yeah. I don't remember it specifically, but it's for us humans to take care of it.
You know, I've met and interviewed a number of people over recent years, Penny Kelly, other people who have had similar experiences in that they've met elves, they've met fairies, they've met, you know, different kinds of beings and elementals that have given them messages from the elemental kingdom, you know, about what we're doing to the planet. So clearly, you know, they're trying to get the message across.
Yeah, I believe that those beings are really connected with the planet. They're almost can serve as a go-between. And it's really important for us humans to understand that the responsibility is ours. It's not that these other beings are so much wiser or we give our power to them. It's just they're here to support us in really taking care of things and correcting some things that have gotten messed up.
Well, when you look at fiction, you know, especially fantasy, which has taken off over the last 30, 40 years, there are so many things in there that, you know, either they're so incredibly imaginative or they're based on something real.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It comes from somewhere.
It comes from somewhere, sure. So that's your 10 books. Which one of those books would you want to keep forever? Which one of those books, is the one that, of all of them, they have to be in this list, absolutely have to be in this list?
It's actually the one that we didn't really talk about, Journey of the Angels, because
we didn't talk about it much. We went off at a tangent, didn't we?
Fine. Now we get to talk about it.
Now we get to talk about it.
That one to me encompasses all the rest. It has little bits and pieces of what all of the others touch on, but it has such a ring of truth. This is my story. This is our story. This is what it's really all about. This is, religion has a piece of it. Science has a piece of it. Everything has a piece. But to me, what's covered in Journey of the Angels brings it all together. And that is probably the most precious book. I'm a little biased. I was there when it was born and I helped produce it and edit, but it's such a passion for me because it has everything.
I have to say again, that book did make a massive impact on me. During the years when Jeff and Linda and Steve and Barbara and Lee, were really getting out there big time, I was very much involved with Steve and Barbara's work. So although I knew of Jeff and I kind of had, interaction with Jeff, I hadn't really followed his work very closely until I read that book. And that was the one that made me sit up and take notice and go, wow, this, for me, that was actually the book that I'd been looking for and didn't know that I was looking for it. But I wanted someone to tell me the story, the true story, of how we came into being. And that book for me was one of those, it was a yes, 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 all the way through.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It just, if you look at every teaching and every religion and every discovery and everything, they all have a piece of something. They all have an angle. But to me, that's the book that just, it's like, here it is.
So would you say that was Tobias's opus?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And was it soon after that Tobias left?
3 weeks later.
3 weeks later, after the book was delivered?
That book, it started as a workshop. It was a weekend workshop. And that was given 3 weeks before his final message. Yes. And before he left, as working with Jeff as a ascended master, giving messages to reincarnate back in Earth and have a human life.
So I have to ask you, what do you think about Saint Germain? He's such a character.
Yes, he is. And Saint Germain is, of course, a historical figure. There's so much written about him. This morning, we got a message from someone who found a comment that was written by an audience member of Count Saint Germain when he was giving recitals or something back in the 1700s. It was just so funny about what a showman he is. Now, Adamus Saint Germain, which is kind of a specific expression of Saint Germain, Saint Germain himself is he reminds me a little bit of Tobias in that deep, broad, profound essence, whereas Adamus is kind of in your face, and challenging. And he and I have had some interactions that have challenged me, but I just adore him also.
Yeah, you have to, I think. I just love his directness.
Yes. And he's that way because that's the group that he works with, which is kind of loosely called Shambra around the world. He's there because we brought him. We want the directness. We don't want to be around the bush anymore.
No.
Let's get this done.
Yeah. It's got to be down to earth and grounded and, and apply to our real lives.
Absolutely. It's very powerful. Yeah.
So tell me about, let's go back to you and your conversations with God. Did you ever wish, God, I wish I'd got out a book with that title myself?
It crossed my mind. I think Neil Donald Walsh his work came out around the same time. There was a lot of consciousness opening with this multidimensional communication at that time, and he tapped into that. And I actually had a website for a while called Conversations with Angels, which kind of worked, but I also felt, well, I'm not a knockoff. I have my own thing. And I really appreciate what Neil Donald Walsh did. And his first book was wonderful. It almost made my list, but I had to put the others on. But I don't regret it either. I personally, in my own life and everything, I wasn't ready for anything like that, to put a book together or to call it that or anything. But it also, it did kind of open that up. It's like, oh, this is okay, that I really am doing this, and I can do this, and other people do it too. So I'm not quite as weird as I thought.
So you've also, as we said earlier, you've worked with many angelic entities, Tobias and Germain, Raphael, Kathumi, Yeshua. Who do you like working with the most?
I think my favorite would be Tobias, although he's not around right now in that way. Since he left in 2009, I've felt him really clearly and closely about 3 times, which in human terms, oh, that's a long time, but his echo is also always here in his material and everything. But we're such old friends, just such old friends. Yeah, Adamus, it's having a jealous fit for fun. I love working with Adamus. He's very challenging. He insists that you don't come to him as a poor needy, help me figure this out. It's like, get over yourself, step up as the master. Yeshua, also just a beautiful old friend for so long. It's hard to pick a favorite, but I would say those 3. We've been around the block a lot of times.
So you've also written a book.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
So part of my job at Crimson Circle is to write a monthly column in our magazine where I share my insights, my experiences, my adventures, my stumbles, and just what I learn, my personal application of the teachings that we are privileged to have. And many people over the years said, you got to write a book, you got to write a book. So my first book is compiled of a number of those monthly columns. Now, I have a lot more books coming, a lot of things that I want to write about and focus on, but that's the first one.
Are you willing to share what else you want to write about?
I think one of the biggest things that I want to write about that I feel is so important, and it's a huge passion of mine, is this integration. We talked about, this is the time of bringing all of our parts and pieces back from all those places and dimensions and times where they've been experiencing, and to bring it all back together. That's what I understand to be realization or ascension, and also to bring in the full divinity, the true self that we are into this reality. It can't really fit into this reality, but to have that connection and just to bring everything together. That's such a profound experience and a huge, deep process, because a lot of times we'll have, let's say, reactions or you self-sabotage, or a lot of different patterns within ourselves that we just don't understand. We think there's something wrong with us, and it's actually some other part of ourselves that's kind of stuck in that situation or that dynamic. And when we can allow that to come home and be reintegrated back into self, then it's no longer external, quote, external, and controlling us and tripping us up. It's come back to the self, and then we can truly become the realized being, the master that we are at the core.
What is your take on where we're at this time in our history on a spiritual level?
We meaning humanity in general?
Yes.
Okay. I see it as a time of profound transformation. A lot of people see things falling apart and getting worse. I see it as house cleaning, as allowing on a real sort of a mass level, allowing these hidden things, which on a personal level might be those parts and pieces of ourselves that are causing chaos kind of unconsciously. That's happening on a mass level. And so the hidden things and the ugly things, yeah, they're coming to the surface, but now they can be addressed and healed or rebalanced, understood. And we take a whole new look. There's something that Adamus shared recently, and it was just released as a free download last night, called Tears of Humanity. And he talks about taking a look at what we've done. You know, we came to Earth as angelic beings to get into these bodies and have these experiences, and we really got off track along the way and caused so much suffering. And this right now is the time that we're stepping back and say, wait, let's not do this anymore. Let's change all this, and not by going out to change, you know, you're doing that wrong and you're doing that wrong and stop what you're doing. No, we come back within and come back to the balance within, and then that goes out into the world. And I know that's what's happening. A lot of us kind of have been on the leading edge of that, you know, over the last 20 years, and it's having an impact. And now what I see is consciousness in general now beginning this inner reckoning.
And how long do you think it's going to take to make that transformation?
In general, of course, it's an individual transformation. It's not something that just sort of happens to everybody, but I think it will be drastically different in 20 years. Look at what's happened over the last 20 years, and there's a segment of the population of conscious humans that have just transformed. I know many of them who are just, everything is different, and that goes out, and that potential goes out, and I see the potential. It's not going to happen for everyone. Not everyone's going to choose harmony with themselves, so they will still have struggle, but as a whole, I see it in the next 20 or 30 years. Absolutely.
Yeah. Wow. So I wanted to ask you about the work that you do privately away from the Crimson Circle. I know that you do private sessions with people. What else do you do?
Yes, I do private sessions. I'm a channeler, and that's the session. I don't really do counseling or therapy work, but when I do the private sessions, I tune into like the support group that we each have, and they share their kind of different perspective and kind of remind you of what you already know. So that's the main thing I do, other, you know, on my own, not associated with Crimson Circle. I am working on another book, which, you know, in the evenings, we'll get it out eventually. And I have 4 children. One of them is still at home, although another one told me this morning he might be coming back for a few months.
That seems to be quite common these days. So they're not gone for long.
You're right. It's like, well, I might be charging rent this time.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience?
Yeah, it's really the fundamental thing that I have come to be very aware of in all this work and this whole journey of discovering and discovering myself, really, and the more that's out there. And it's had to become apparent to me with my kids and with all the clients that I work with. And that is kind of what I said about the red lion. There is a big picture, and your soul, yourself, your true self is bringing you along the way. You've never been lost. You've been deep, deep in experience, but your soul is still there. You're still connected. And no matter what challenges you face along the way, no matter how confused you get, no matter how unlucky you feel, ultimately it all comes to wisdom. It all comes into balance. And the bottom line is to trust yourself. Now, when I moved to Colorado, I literally had $500 to my name and nowhere to land. I was in a hotel. And the reason I did that wasn't because it made sense. It was because that's what myself had to do. That called me. And so you'll get inspirations and just knowings that you have to make a choice. And your mind is going to go, what are you, crazy? This doesn't make any sense. And look at all the things that can go wrong. But you have to come back to the knowing. And so that's what I want to leave with everyone, is just trust that. Trust yourself. Even when you don't know how or why or when, it does work out. It just does. It can't not work out.
Do you feel that you have reached a place where you know exactly what you came here to do and you're very happy that you're doing it?
Yes, I'm happy to say yes. I am doing exactly what I came into this lifetime to do. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be.
And how would you describe that?
What I do or how it feels?
Both. Both.
Well, I'm definitely here to support the work that Jeffrey Hoppe is doing with Crimson Circle. It's an old agreement. It's like, yes, I'll be there no matter what, and I'm committed to get this done. It's not going to last forever. Adamus isn't going to be around forever, because this is a very specific journey that we're on, and it will be done at some point. But this is where I belong right now. And there is no feeling in the world like knowing you're where you belong. I learned a new word. A friend of mine told me a new word a week or two ago. It's a Japanese word called ikigai, I-K-I-G-A-I. And it's the sense, if you look it up, it's made up of 4 parts, something like what I'm good at, what I can get money for, what the world needs, and something else. And when they all converge, that's your reason for existence. And I'm in that.
Tell us the title of your book.
Stories
Your first
from,
book.
Yes, my first book is called Stories from My Last Lifetime.
Stories from My Last Lifetime.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's a little bit of a play on words, but this is my last of many lifetimes on this earth. And this lifetime is about bringing together all the wisdom. And I've done a lot of stories. I've had a lot of adventures, a lot of experiences where the wisdom does come back. And so it's about sharing that.
And you really think this is your last lifetime here?
Yeah.
How do you know that?
Because I feel like I've done everything I set out to do. I've experienced just about everything on this earth, and I have fulfilled my purpose for coming to earth in the first place eons ago.
So what do you think awaits you?
All it is.
Good answer. Good answer. Tell us the name of your website.
My website it's all spelled out, youaregodalso.com. YOUARE. Yeah, it's all spelled out.
And I imagine that's a message that you would like to leave behind you.
Absolutely.
You're going to have it on your epitaph? On your gravestone?
Yeah, if there is such a thing, yes.
Yeah.
On my memorial.
On your memorial. Yeah, yeah. Okay. It's been a delight to have you, Jean.
Thank you so much, Sandie. It was just a joy to share with you. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
You know the title of Jean's book. Go and check out her website. And if you're looking for a bit of guidance from your team I would recommend you go and see Jean. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we'll be back next week with another episode as usual. Thank you for being with us.